They're taking your baby. What would you do if you heard that hours after giving birth? I didn't scream. I didn't even sit up. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I just stared. Because at first it didn't make sense. The hospital room still smelled like antiseptic and something faintly metallic. My body felt like it didn't belong to me yet. Stitched, heavy, slow. Machines hummed quietly around me. My newborn son, my son, was asleep in the clear bassinet beside my bed, wrapped tight, breathing softly like nothing in the world could ever touch him. And then the door opened. Not rushed, not urgent, just deliberate. A man stepped inside like he owned the room. Richard Hale, 62. Impeccable suit. Silver hair combed back with precision. Well, the kind of calm that doesn't ask permission. It assumes it. Behind him, two others followed. One I recognized vaguely as a lawyer type. Briefcase, stiff posture, eyes already scanning. The other, I didn't know. But he moved like someone who didn't need to explain himself. Richard smiled at me. Not warmly, not kindly, just politely. We're taking the baby. I actually let out a small laugh, a dry, confused laugh that hurt my ribs. Okay, I said weakly. That's not funny. No one laughed with me. That's when something shifted. I looked at the nurse, the same nurse who had been helping me just minutes ago. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She stepped back instead. One step, then another. Why would she step back? Then I looked at security. They were right there. Two of them, standing near the door, watching, not moving, not saying anything. Have you ever had a moment where your brain just lags behind reality? Like it refuses to catch up because the truth doesn't fit? That's what this was. What are you doing? I asked, my voice thinner now. You can't just... The man behind Richard was already moving. He walked past me, didn't even look at me, straight to the bassinet. My body reacted before my mind did. I tried to sit up. Pain ripped through my abdomen, sharp and immediate, forcing me back down. Stop! I gasped. No one stopped him. He lifted my son, carefully, almost gently, and that somehow made it worse, because this wasn't chaos. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. I turned back to Richard, my heart slamming now, finally catching up. You don't have the right, I said, my voice shaking. There's no custody order. You can't... He stepped closer. Calm, controlled, certain. You won't see him again. Not loud, not angry, just final. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It locked. Because here's the thing they didn't understand about me. I had already imagined this scenario. Not exactly like this. Not in a hospital room, not hours after giving birth. But I knew the Hale family. I knew what they were capable of. The quiet moves, the legal pressure, the way they didn't argue. They arranged. And I had prepared. My hand moved slowly to the side table. My phone was still there. No one stopped me. Why would they? To them, this was already over. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, not from panic, but from adrenaline finally hitting. One number. That's all it took. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. I didn't explain. I didn't hesitate. I just whispered, "Activate it." A pause on the other end, then, "Are you sure?" I watched as my son was carried out of the room, watched the door begin to close behind them, and I said very clearly, "Yes." The line went dead. And for a moment, nothing happened. No alarms, no shouting, no sudden rush, just silence, which made what happened next even worse. Or maybe exactly what I needed. They thought I was weak. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone smiles at you while quietly planning to take everything from you? That was Ethan's family, and I didn't fully understand it until it was already too late. Ethan Hale was charming when I met him, that kind of effortless confidence that pulls you in before you even realize it. He was 29, Polished, successful, the kind of man who always seemed to know exactly what to say. At first. But charm has a shelf life. It started small, subtle comments, quiet corrections. Maybe don't wear that. You don't need to work that much. My family prefers things a certain way. His family, that was the real center of gravity, especially his father, Richard. Richard Hale didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Everything about him was controlled, calculated. Conversations with him felt less like talking and more like being assessed, measured, filed away. The first time I realized something was off was during a dinner at their estate. I was about 3 months pregnant, still processing it myself, still figuring out what my future looked like, and they were already talking like it belonged to them. The child will carry the Hale name, Richard said casually over wine, as if discussing an investment. We'll ensure the right environment, Ethan added, barely looking at me. I remember sitting there, blinking, thinking, did I miss something? Because no one had asked me anything. Not what I wanted, not how I felt, not what kind of mother I planned to be. It was like I had already been removed from the equation. That night, something shifted, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The conversations got colder after that, more structured, more strategic. I started noticing things, documents left out too deliberately, phone calls that stopped when I entered the room, phrases like contingency and custodial stability. They weren't preparing for a baby, they were preparing for control. So I left. At 3 months pregnant, I walked away from Ethan, from the house, from all of it. No dramatic fight, no screaming, just distance. And that's when I met Marisol Vega. Marisol was 34, sharp, direct, and very hard to impress. She'd been a friend of a friend and a lawyer who specialized in family law, but not the kind you see in ads. She dealt with complicated cases, quiet cases, the kind people don't talk about. I told her everything. Or at least, I thought I did. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. And when I finished, she leaned back and asked me one question. Do you think they'll try to take your child? I hesitated, because saying it out loud made it real. I don't know, I said. She nodded slowly. They will. No hesitation, no doubt. And then she said something that stayed with me. People like that don't argue. They position. That's when she told me about something I had never heard of before. A legal safeguard, rarely used, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Not something you file in panic, something you prepare in advance. We spent weeks setting it up. Paperwork, conditions, triggers, all designed for one specific scenario. If my child was ever taken without my consent, especially in a medically vulnerable state. At the time, it felt extreme, paranoid even. I remember asking her, what are the chances I'll actually need this? She didn't sugarcoat it. Low, she said, then paused, but not 0. So I signed. And then I tried to forget about it, tried to believe I'd never have to use it, tried to believe that maybe I had overestimated them. But now, back in that hospital bed, watching the elevator doors close on my newborn son, hearing the soft ding as it descended, I knew exactly what this was. Not chaos, not confusion, execution, and the worst part, everyone around me had just let it happen. I tightened my grip on the phone, pressing it harder against my ear as the line reconnected. He just took him, I said, my voice steady now, too steady. You know what to do. There was no panic on the other end, just a quiet inhale and then, okay, Marisol said. Then we're doing this. A pause. 1 second, 2. And then she added, her tone shifting into something colder. They have no idea what they just triggered. The call ended, and for a moment, nothing changed. The hallway was still quiet. The nurses still moved normally. The world hadn't caught up yet, but somewhere, something had already started. 20 minutes. That's how long it took for everything to change. Let me ask you this. What does power actually look like? Is it money? Influence? A last name that opens doors? Or is it the moment those doors suddenly slam shut? At first, nothing happened. I was still in that hospital bed, the emptiness beside me louder than any noise. My arms felt wrong without him there, too light, too still. Nurses passed by like everything was normal. Machines kept beeping. Life continued. And that was the most unsettling part, because I had just lost my child, and the world didn't even pause. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I started to feel it creep in. Doubt. What if I was too late? What if it didn't work? What if they already got away? My fingers tightened around the thin hospital blanket. My body ached, but I barely noticed anymore. My focus was locked on one thing: waiting. Then, at exactly 20 minutes, it began. Not with shouting, not with chaos, with silence. A strange, unnatural silence. The hallway outside my room shifted. You could feel it before you understood it. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Footsteps slowed, then a soft click. Another and another. Doors locking, electronically, one by one. I turned my head toward the hallway just as a nurse stopped abruptly, looking up at the ceiling like she was listening to something through an earpiece. "What's going on?" someone whispered. No one answered. Then the elevators. A distant mechanical halt. Frozen, mid-operation. Now people were noticing. Security radios crackled to life. Sharp bursts of static breaking the quiet. "Confirm lockdown. Who authorized? Stand by, stand by." The tone had changed. This wasn't routine. This wasn't a drill. This was control being taken. And not by them. A few doors down, I saw movement. Fast, tense. Richard. He had reappeared in the hallway. But something was different now. The calm was slipping. His posture was tighter, his steps quicker, less measured. The man next to him, Daniel Cross, his lawyer, was already on his phone. "No, that's not possible," Daniel muttered sharply. "Override it. I don't care who signed it, just override." He stopped mid-sentence, listening. Then his face changed. Not anger, not frustration. Something worse. Confusion. "They're blocking access," he said quietly to Richard. "I can't get through to anyone." That's when Richard looked up. And for the first time, he didn't look in control. He looked uncertain. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the hallway, but they weren't hospital security. Their presence felt different, heavier, deliberate. They didn't rush. They didn't react. They simply walked forward like they already knew exactly where they were going. One of them spoke, voice calm but firm. "We're looking for Ivy Thompson." Every head turned, including Richard's. Our eyes met across the hallway, and in that moment, he understood. Not everything, but enough. I was no longer the powerless woman in a hospital bed. I was the center of whatever this was. The nurses moved quickly now, suddenly attentive, suddenly careful. Within seconds, I was being wheeled out into the hallway despite the protests of my own body. "Easy, easy," someone murmured, adjusting the IV. But I wasn't focused on them. I was watching Richard, because now he was watching me. The officer approached, pulling out a tablet. "Ms. Thompson," he said, "we need to verify a few things." I nodded once. No hesitation, no fear. He tapped the screen, opened a file. My file. The hallway seemed to shrink around us as he read. Line by line, slowly, carefully. And I watched it happen. That moment. The shift. His eyes paused, then moved again, then stopped completely. His jaw tightened slightly as he processed whatever he was seeing. Beside him, the second officer leaned in. "What is it?" he asked quietly. The first officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted his gaze and looked directly past me, at Richard, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You shouldn't have touched that child." No anger, no raised voice, just certainty, final. And just like that, Everything Richard thought he controlled was gone. But the question still hung in the air. What exactly had I activated? And more importantly, what was about to happen next? You ever hear of a law that only exists for the moment someone like you crosses the line? Because Richard hadn't, and that's exactly why he walked straight into it. The hallway felt tighter now. Not physically, but psychologically, like the walls had shifted just enough to remind everyone who was actually in control. And it wasn't him anymore. The officer turned the tablet slightly, angling it toward his partner. His voice stayed low. I controlled, but every word landed with weight. "Maternal Emergency Protective Order," he said. "Pre-filed, pre-approved, trigger conditions met." The second officer frowned slightly. "That's rare." "Yeah," the first replied, "because it's not for normal cases." Now Richard stepped forward, not aggressively, carefully, measured again, but it was forced this time. "You're misunderstanding the situation," he said smoothly. "We have legal documentation authorizing temporary custodial transfer." "No," the officer cut in. One word, flat, final. "You had documentation," he clarified. "It's now suspended." That landed. You could see it. Not just on Richard, but on Daniel, his lawyer. The man who had walked in with absolute confidence was now scanning the room like he was looking for an exit that didn't exist. "That's not how jurisdiction works," Daniel said, though there was a crack in his voice now. "You can't just override—" "We didn't," the officer replied calmly. "She did." And then, for the first time, all eyes turned to me, still in the wheelchair. Hospital gown, IV line taped to my arm, looking like the weakest person in the room. But I wasn't. Because this had already been decided weeks ago. "You filed this?" Daniel asked, disbelief creeping in. I didn't answer right away. Didn't need to. The officer did it for me. "It was filed under a high-risk custodial interference clause," he explained, "designed specifically for cases involving premeditated removal of a newborn from a medically vulnerable parent." Silence. Thick. Heavy. Then he continued. "Once triggered, it initiates immediate containment protocols. Any facility lockdown, jurisdictional escalation, suspension of all third-party custody claims until review." Richard's expression hardened. Not panic, not yet, but calculation was back, and it was moving fast. "You're overstepping," he said quietly. "This will be corrected." The officer held his gaze. "No," he said again, "it won't." Behind them, more personnel began to move in, not rushing but purposeful, controlled, like every step had already been mapped out before they even arrived. "Where's the child now?" the officer asked. A nurse, visibly shaken, stepped forward. "He was taken toward the east elevators before lockdown." The officer nodded once and spoke into his radio. "Initiate custody restoration. Infant male, approximately 4 hours old. Unauthorized removal confirmed. Secure and return to mother immediately." That was it. One sentence, and everything shifted. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. "Richard, this is bad," he muttered under his breath. "This isn't just civil, this could turn criminal fast." But Richard didn't respond, because for the first time, he was losing. Not publicly, not loudly, but structurally. And men like him? They don't fear confrontation. They fear systems they can't control. Minutes passed. Longer than they should have. Longer than I could comfortably breathe through. Every second stretched tight, my body aching, my chest hollow without my son there. And for the first time since this started, a flicker of fear returned. What if something went wrong? What if they couldn't find him in time? I closed my eyes, just for a second, and waited. Footsteps, fast, approaching. I opened my eyes. A nurse appeared around the corner, holding something, small, wrapped, moving. My breath caught. But they hadn't reached me yet. Not quite, not fully, not until... What actually happened in that hospital wasn't chaos. It was precision. And now, finally, Everything came into focus. The nurse stepped closer, her arms steady but her expression shaken. Wrapped tightly in that familiar hospital blanket was my son, alive, safe, crying. The sound hit me harder than anything else. Not fear, not anger, relief, pure, overwhelming relief. They placed him back into my arms, carefully adjusting the IV line as I instinctively pulled him closer. My body protested, pain flaring through my abdomen, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the weight of him against my chest. For a moment, I didn't speak, didn't look up. I just held him. And then it broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. Tears slipped down the sides of my face as I pressed my cheek against his head, my entire body finally catching up to what had just happened. Behind me, the system kept moving, because this wasn't over, not even close. Logical payoff. What actually happened? The officer's voice carried clearly now, explaining it not just to Richard, but to everyone watching. The Maternal Emergency Protective Order, he said, was legally filed in advance under a high-risk classification. It's designed for situations involving potential coercion, unlawful custody interference, or abuse of institutional influence. He glanced at Richard. In simple terms, you tried to take a newborn from a medically incapacitated mother without valid, enforceable custody authorization. Daniel exhaled sharply, already knowing where this was going. Our documentation, he started, was preemptively invalidated the moment the order triggered, the officer interrupted. You were operating under assumed authority, not legal authority. That was the mistake. Not force, not aggression, assumption. Richard had believed the system would bend like it always had. This time, it didn't. Consequence payoff. What it cost them. It didn't happen all at once, but you could see it beginning. Richard wasn't escorted out immediately. That would have been too simple. Instead, he was asked to stay, questioned, documented. Everything he had done, every step, every instruction, was now part of a formal investigation. Charges weren't shouted across the hallway, but they were coming. Unlawful custodial interference, attempted coercion, potential fraud through misrepresented legal authority. Daniel? He stepped back quickly. Not physically, but professionally. I wasn't aware of the full context, he said carefully to the officers, already creating distance, already protecting himself. The hospital staff? Internal review. Why had no one intervened? Why had documentation been accepted without verification? That silence, the same silence I felt when they took my son, was now being examined under a microscope. And Ethan? He arrived too late. Of course he did. Confused, pale, completely unprepared for what his father had set in motion. When he saw me holding our son again, something in his expression shifted. Not anger, not control, loss. Because now, he didn't dictate what happened next. The court would. Emotional payoff. Ivy's release. I looked down at my son, his tiny fingers curling instinctively against me. Everything in my body slowed. The fear, the adrenaline, the tension, gone, replaced by something quieter, stronger, certainty. They had tried to erase me from my own child's life, and they failed. Not because I fought harder in the moment, but because I prepared before it ever happened. Final resolution moment. 3 days later, I walked out of that hospital. Not rushed, not forced, discharged properly, my son in my arms. The same doors that once closed behind him opened for both of us. Marisol was waiting outside, leaning against her car, arms crossed, calm as ever. You held it together, she said simply. I adjusted the blanket around my son, looking down at him before answering. I didn't have a choice. She nodded once, then added, They won't try that again. Not a guess, a fact. Behind us, the hospital stood quiet again. Normal. Like nothing had ever happened. But everything had changed. I turned away from it. From them. From all of it. And as I stepped forward, my son safe in my arms, one thought settled clearly in my mind. He thought I had no power. He just didn't know where to look.